people have forgotten that everywhere, America, Europe, everywhere, there were these groups of so-called revolutionaries. You know, we are revolutionaries. And they would be in a house somewhere, and I had very interesting letters about that. The most interesting being coming from Ireland, saying, did I realize that it was enough for these young people, if they wore the right uniform and used the right jargon, to live quite happily for years, never go so much as to a political meeting, but they were revolutionaries. Now that era has absolutely gone with the death of the Soviet Union. That came to an end. But there were a lot of them, you know, you met them all around the place. And so that one was based on partly remembering what it was like being a member of a communist group when, you know, come the revolution, which is always said half laughing, which is very funny when I look back. And next door to me at that particular time, just down across the road, was a house stuffed full of squatters and revolutionaries. So I saw them quite a lot. But what was really interesting about this was they never stopped talking about money. There might be revolutionary money. This is what they talked about. How to get the next payment from somewhere.
Yes.
So that was really hilarious.
Well, the wonderful thing about the novel is, I think, is the central character, Alice, is this extraordinary and not completely unlikable mixture of a sort of a homemaker. She wants to make soup and look after people, and she goes into squats and sees how they can be made into nice homes. And yet she has also this sort of this kind of rhetoric of resentment and anger at the world she lives in, and that's extraordinary. That extraordinary sort of mixture is, I think, what kind of makes it such a memorable novel.
Well, has it occurred to you that this is a contradiction at the heart of all socialist groups? I don't know if they still say "come the revolution," which they at one point did, or "you fascist this, fascist that." That's gone. While they were talking all this stuff, they were saving the whales and looking after cats and feeding the poor and all that. It's right in the heart of that particular socialist tradition. It's a very striking contradiction, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and it's sort of, and Alice kind of, it ends that actually these people, although they're sort of, they're absurd, really, they end up doing real harm, don't they?
Yes. Well, that came out of the Harrods bombing.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember it.
I do, very well.
The IRA said it wasn't them. They were obviously disgusted to think any of us would think they could do anything so amateur as the Harrods bombing. So I was talking to a friend on the telephone about this bombing, and I said, well, obviously Alice did it, you know, the real name. And I thought, my God, what a title for a novel. Because Alice had done it. This marvellous incompetence and idealism and rubbish that they live in. So we knew Alice very well. We watched her for years. And at one point, she, her mother gave her some money. I mean, the real Alice. And her boyfriend said, you must buy a yacht and we will use it for taking guns to the IRA. So they bought a yacht, but they never used it for anything but having fun somewhere. Yeah.
And and in the 1990s, I mean, you were writing these novels and more that we haven't talked about. In the 1990s, you wrote a couple of volumes of autobiography as well, which I think some people like as much as your novels. But you stopped in 1962 with those, and I mean, they only take your life to 1962. Why did you decide?
It's very simple. In 1960, I was one of these Earth mothers, and the house was full of kids in trouble in one way or another. And it was at that time, I don't know if you noticed it, there were these women with housefuls of kids. Why did that happen? I don't know why it did. And but the point is that all these kids are now grown up and are close friends. and that I couldn't possibly write about them. I just couldn't do it. So I wrote The Sweetest Dream, where I didn't use the people, but I used, I hope, the atmosphere of the 60s. And that started off because I was in Germany being interviewed, and this young man wanted to know about the 60s. He's talking with such contempt. I said, whatever else, it had this most wonderful generosity, and I said, imagine a young man will just turn up somewhere and say, my name is Bert, and I'm a friend of Freddie's. Can I come in? Oh, do come in, and they might be there for months. He said, you can't just let anybody into your house just like that. You can't do that. He might be a thief. I said, but maybe he was a thief, but this is what we did. And I thought, my God, everyone has forgotten it. And it was, in fact, a wonderfully generous time because it was going on everywhere. I've got letters somewhere from other Earth Mothers and sort of, well, the one that I liked best was someone in Mississippi or somewhere saying, I understand that you've had Tom there. Don't you think we should do something about his teeth? Wonderful. Anyway, I can't remember about his teeth. We probably did do something about his teeth.
There's sort of affection as well as ridicule when you look back to...
I don't ridicule. It was a wonderfully... well, no one now can just go around the world on half a sentence. You know, I'm Freddie and I know Janet. I mean, it was wonderful, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know. I didn't really live through it, I suppose.
No, well, I think it was terrific. No one could do it now because you're too suspicious.
Yes. And you were writing also, I don't know if this is a fair way of describing, but some of your books from the late 80s and the 1990s, they seem sort of just like Shakespeare wrote problem plays. I think you wrote some problem novels. So there's The Fifth Child, for instance, about a couple who think they're going to have this kind of wonderful, blissful family life, and they have a sort of malevolent child. Or there's Love Again, about a woman in the 1990s, about a woman who thinks all the sort of tumult of passion is perhaps with relief past, and then she falls in love again. I mean, is that to think of them as problem?
I thought it was problem novels. The Fifth Child, it was simply because I wanted to write a version of the fairy leaving a baby in the human cradle, because
Right.
you know it's an ancient story in practically every culture, which makes you wonder if in fact babies have been left in cradles and we've forgotten that time, because I maintain there were little people. I mean, they've just found some over in Sumatra somewhere called the Flores. Have you read about them?
No, I haven't. No.
They found a race of people who are humans but smaller, and some of the scientists say, no, this is totally impossible. This was just an aberrant human. Couldn't be. But other scientists say, no, these were human beings. They were just smaller. And I've thought this always, where do our tales come from about the little people? It was based on something. So I think there were little people. And so we called them fairies or trolls or whatever. But I'm sure they were here. Why does every second garden have gnomes in it? What are we remembering? We're remembering something. It's half out of memory.
And you've done, I mean, fantasy. Well, I don't know if fantasy is the right word for it, but quite recently, I mean, only a year ago, you published The Cleft, which is fantasy the right word for it? It's an extraordinary kind of imaginative projection of a sort of primitive tale in which the female sex pre-existed the male sex, and then...
Well, it was in the papers at that time. You know how there's an idea, and it's around and it disappeared. The idea was that the basic human stock was female, and then men came along later. The more you think about this, the more it explains. Because as you know, all women say men are just nothing but children. I mean,
Yes.
this is always. So I thought it makes a lot of sense if we had women on their seashore. You know, it was a very nice climate. They just ate fish. They never had anything to startle them out of their boring life. And suddenly men arrived. You know, men always rushing up the Eiger and going around the world on small boats. must have been very, like Top Gear suddenly arrived.
Yes.
So it must have been awful for them, poor girls.
I wonder if our international viewers will know what Top Gear is. But
I don't know. Well, it's one of the funniest programs on television.
Inadvertently, though, isn't it?
I know, it's not, no. It's, oh, God, it's hilarious. It's
about men
motoring.
and cars, yes.
And I swear that all women must look at that, just marvelling. There you have these men absorbed in these horrible cars. I've laughed so much over that program. Anyway, just imagine the girls who've never ever been upset by anything. Not only do they have little boys with penises, because, and I'm going back to memory when I had my first child. There's a woman in the same room who was having her third child. She'd had 2 girls, and this was a boy. I was having my first. And she was in a state of absolute incandescent. She says to the nurse, "What's this?" Meaning the little boy's apparatus. So the nurse said, "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, aren't you lucky? You've got such a dear little boy. Take it away, I'm not taking that home." So I said to her, "What's the matter with you?" You know, there's my boy. He says, I'm not going to take that. I mean, look at it, and it's horrible. Because you probably know, as you've got children, that little boys have a lot of physical apparatus. And then it comes right in about a week or 2. But it's quite a surprise seeing a newborn baby. They're all genitals. Well, just imagine these poor girls suddenly faced with this. So it's quite a funny idea, actually.
I mean, since then you've written another book, actually, Alfred and Emily. You're still writing. I mean,
Yeah.
could you? That's a book which I think explores in a certain way the lives of your parents. Is that right? I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
The reason for that is, for no reason I can see, the wars in my life sit on me more and more as a kind of horror. I still can't believe that we're so stupid as to... Anyway, there's no good going to it. Either you feel that or you don't. I'm so appalled by those wars. I mean, the First World War, by God, it did Europe in, and we're still living in the aftermath.
And that book's about... Isn't that book about the aftermath?
Yes, I've simply taken my parents and abolished World War One. And if I remind you, no World War One, no Russian Revolution, no Soviet Union, no Soviet Empire, no Hitler, no Holocaust, no World War Two. It all came from World War One. And I've given them rather ordinary lives, sort of decent, sensible lives. Particularly my mother, who has some money and can use it, which she should have done. And made my father a farmer, because he longed all his life to be an English farmer in Essex or Suffolk, where his forebears came from. So I gave him that, and I gave him a nice, loving wife instead of a rather prickly one. And then I have the second half of the book, which is what actually happened, which I think is a heartbreaker, because that's my father's life as it happened. You know, he got diabetes, he got all the things that you get with neglected diabetes.
So the book has the imagined life and the real life sort of interleaved.
So I think it's an anti-war book. It's a war violently against, it's a book against war. So, which I felt all my life, and I just feel it more and more. And things like Iraq. I mean, I don't have to go into that. There's so many people appalled by it.
So you're still sort of feeling driven to write things?
Well, I don't think so anymore. I think I've had it. I don't have any energy.
Well, I'm not
The
sure I
energy's
believe.
gone.
I'm not sure I believe it.
Well, that's all right. I haven't got it.
Well, it's an incredible sort of oeuvre to go back over, and it's very kind of you to do that for us. And thanks very much,
Thank
Doris.
you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.